about shame, shame, shame. It's the name of her game. There's so much to do, and we're gonna speak true. So many to blame.
Welcome, all you listeners, and now I'm going to call you viewers because, as I have said, you are watching us as well as listening to us today, and this isn't going to be the last time we do this. You're going to be able to see us several times throughout the year, and there is going to be special visual content available to subscribers. We'll be talking more about that in May. For now, I just want to get back to the fascinating conversation we've been having with our dynamic, world-changing guest.
Wonderful guy.
Lyndon Haviland.
I remember we were talking about, I was like, okay, I'm going to go after corporate sponsors. How do I do it? And you were telling me, frame the issue holistically so you make it seem like it affects the family unit. You think you'd get maximum impact on a national level? Like if we're talking about the Truth campaign that I believe you either started or were a part of. I forgot how that went down. But what's the national campaign? Is it the family unit, or is it specifically child sexual abuse, or is it child maltreatment as a whole? How would you frame it nationally? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it totally does. And thank you for that question. So first of all, I'm going to say it's really hard to talk to corporations to say, hey, let's talk about child sex abuse. So I'll give you two examples of my favorite examples of how it's hard. One is, the first you think, well, let's figure out what's a company that's all about kids and families. So maybe it's Disney, or maybe it's the people who make your car seat, right? So one of my fantasies, of course, is since you cannot bring your child home from the hospital unless you have a appropriate car seat, you know how to put it in the back seat of the car, and you know how to strap the kid in. Well, why couldn't we just have a flyer in there that says, in addition to having your child be safe in the car, let's talk about child sex abuse. But the problem becomes, Disney, it's all about family fun. Well, could we train all Disney employees to to talk about child sex abuse or be aware of it? The problem is, if Disney wants to talk about child sex abuse, the first thing the media might say is, Disney's taking on child sex abuse. Is there a real reason for that? Is child sex abuse happening at Disney theme parks? Why else would they do this? Right? So I think for me, going head on child sex abuse to corporations is not possible. Because, and again, now it goes back to this idea that I talked about previously, that the child who is at risk of child sex abuse is often at risk for food insecurity, housing instability, domestic violence, poor educational attainment. That's the same kid, right? So child sex abuse is, again, an egregious form of domestic violence, but it's also just one more problem that this child needs to have. This child is confronting. So to me, I think the way we could go about it on a national level, and it's something that Darkness to Light is part of a coalition, which is called Keep Kids Safe. So if you say keep kids safe, well, if you are the people who make bike helmets or, elbow guards, that's keeping kids safe. So now we could talk about keeping kids safe, and we could have an image of kids in elbow guards and, on their skateboard, happy. And so now we're talking about kids' safety, and keeping a kid safe from, concussion is good and important. And we can also talk about this other thing, which puts kids at risk and has them completely unsafe, and that's child sex abuse, right? So to me, you have to have it in a holistic approach, because again, the safety helmet people don't want to do child sex abuse because people will ask why. Even, so Darkness to Light has for many years partnered with the YMCA. And the YMCA actually came to Darkness to Light when everything happened in Happy Valley and in Pennsylvania with the Sandusky issues, right? And so we went to, at the invitation of the Y, we went to Happy Valley and we conducted a series of community conversations about how to have a healthy, resilient community. And the head of the YMCA there was amazing. He had like a weekly radio show talking about the ways that the Y was changing its policies and how the community was responding. And so to me, that kind of holistic approach where, so I don't have children. So, but when we begin our training at Darkness to Light, the first thing we ask you is to close your eyes for a moment and think of 10 children, 10 individual children that you would do anything to keep safe, right? So we make it personal. And again, that's a really important thing. Make it personal, make it actionable, and make it holistic. To me, that is the win, because if you can have someone imagine themselves, what would you do to keep your niece or your nephew safe? What would you do to keep your neighbor's child safe? Then all of a sudden, it's not like all those children out there in the world who you don't know, who are nameless and faceless, but they're named, they're important to you, and you have an emotional resonance with them.
Mm-hmm. Linda, I was going to ask, are you seeing any new sources of funding coming, available? Or are you seeing any new creative ways to generate funds to address, survivors, children of sexual assault, as you continue to make this a national conversation?
Well, the most important funder of child sex abuse conversations and work and advocacy, both domestically and globally, has been the Oak Foundation. The Oak Foundation is a private family foundation based in Geneva, Switzerland. And the Oak Foundation has given money to Together for Girls, Darkness to Light, and this coalition to keep kids safe, to again begin that conversation and to have national dialogue. Through the Keep Kids Safe Coalition, we've also been able to work with the Office of Gender Policies in the White House. And we're seeing, and they're going to have in April, I'm not sure, I can't remember which day, but in April, a advocacy day where survivors from all across the country will be coming to Washington to talk to legislators. So I see this coalition of Keep Kids Safe being really important because, Derek, as you described how in Illinois, you have all these people competing for the same limited amount of funds. And so they're kind of dog eat dog taking funds from one another. Instead, Keep Kids Safe is saying there's an infinite amount of money there. We haven't found it yet. But if we work together and we work smarter and we raise our voices together, we can impact change. And so I see the coalitions as being if you will, a statement that there needs to be, and there is a possibility of more money. In the Senate, so one of the people who's a champion of this is John Cornyn from Texas. And so John Cornyn, again, you ask yourself, what influences John Cornyn to be an advocate for this? And that's because Jenna Quinn is a adult survivor of child sex abuse. She has a book, and the law in Texas, which was passed in her name, is called Jenna's Law. Jenna's Law requires that every person who works with children in the educational system, so that's the crossing guard, the bus driver, the teacher's aide, the teacher, the school board, all of them are required to have a training in evidence-informed training on the prevention, detection, and reporting of child sex abuse. And so Jenna Quinn went in to talk to John Cornyn and talked about how the law was passed in Texas and how it has, then Texas, a lot of the training from Texas was done by Darkness to Light in English and in Spanish, in person and online, in Stewards of Children, that training resulted in an increase in the number of child sex abuse reports. And so that's kind of, on one level, it's counterintuitive. You say, oh, we have an increase in reports. That's actually good news because it means people are reporting what they see as opposed to staying silent.
Right.
But so Jenna went to see Senator Cornyn, and she convinced him and his staff that this was a great law, again, because it's evidence-informed training, it's focused on adults, it's not telling children to prevent sex abuse of themselves, it's saying to adults, you need to prevent child sex abuse, adult responsibility. So John Cornyn, in the last Congress, proposed this as a national law, and he got he got agreement in the whole Senate that this would be important as a national law. And so that's good news, right? But the bad news is, as you know, teachers have a wide range of unfunded mandates. So it actually didn't pass into law as a national law because there was other people in the Senate said, it's fine. Like, I'm totally supportive of the prevention of child sex abuse. But if we're going to require this of our educational systems, which are already overburdened, we must provide funding to make that happen. So I have some hope that in, maybe not in this current climate, but that there are strong, passionate advocates on both sides of the aisle, in the House and in the Senate, who will at some point find funding to fund prevention. The vast majority of federal dollars that have come in have gone to hotlines so that if someone calls either with a suspicion of child sex abuse or needs immediate assistance, there is someone to answer the phone. But as you know, that's insufficient because that's, in most cases, that's talking to a victim, hopefully en route to being a survivor, and it is not talking about prevention. So what I would love to see is actually a federal embracing of the two facts. One, prevention is possible, and that we should fund it at an appropriate level.
I've been emailing with the somebody from the Moore Center for the Prevention of Sexual Abuse, Child Sexual Abuse at Johns Hopkins, getting them. Hopefully that'll be one of the next guests on the show. And they got $2 million to start it and start doing the research. And they have in their the 2022 report, it was okay, they had $2 million to go into prevention research, and then they started talking about how much money goes into incarcerating, offenders, and it's a factor of 20 billion to 1. But I was just thinking about in when you're trying to bridge the aisle, right, and get everybody involved, wouldn't a useful tool be very thorough, meta-analysis of what's going on? Isn't that wouldn't that data be good? Because the data that exists on child sexual abuse, on a national level, it's there's not enough. It hasn't been properly funded. So wouldn't one of the first starting points be funding research?
Derek, thank you for that question, because you are my head is exploding. So here are the three things. One, you're exactly right. The data at the national level is terrible. So what would I like if, and I love the fact that you're talking to the Moore Center at Hopkins. They are, Elizabeth Letourneau is the top researcher on this topic. And one of the things that she likes to talk about, and talks about more eloquently than anyone else, is the idea that everyone who has inappropriate sexual impulses towards a child does not act on them, right? And so it's really important to understand that. And for example, though, if you're a young person and you're having these inappropriate thoughts about children, and you tell it to your psychiatrist, or God forbid, the school nurse, they're supposed to report it. So you can't get treatment. You can't get a conversation about why it's inappropriate and what you should do about it and all of that. So I think Europe, Germany and the UK, is very much ahead of us in terms of talking to people. Switzerland, exactly. So, but the issue of the data. So I think if I had a couple wishes, my first wish is that we would have decent national data. And that decent national data would include agreed upon definitions of what is child sexual abuse and what are we seeing? Because we are seeing, in some cases, we're seeing a rise in child-on-child sexual abuse. And so if you have an older child with a younger child and it's inappropriate actions, do we label that older child as a sexual predator for life? And so there are policy questions, there are data questions, and then we have national data that we need to have. I don't know if you remember in the last few weeks, the CDC released a report on the dire straits of young women and their mental health, how there's a huge increase in the number of sexual assault, a significant increase in suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts, right? We don't have similar data nationally about child sex abuse. And I think, as you know, as a public health professional, I'd like the data, because if we said, here's the data today in 2023, and now in 2030, we can judge our progress, because in the 7 years since we had that national data, what have we seen? We don't know, because we don't have the national data. So I would like to see the CDC lead national data, agreed upon definitions on what it is. I'd like to see a Surgeon General's report. As you referenced, I worked with the Truth Campaign and I helped to start it. And when you look at the tobacco control movement in America, we often talk about our success or our challenges, starting with the Surgeon General's report. And what did the surgeon, right? So I'd love to see a Surgeon General's report on child sex abuse that looked at what is the state of the data, what do we know about the prevalence and incidence, what do we know about prevention strategies that do and do not work, what do we know about the long-term consequences of unreported child sex abuse, what do we know, so I think a Surgeon General's report would be a critical step forward. And then the third thing is I'd like to see a law like Gemma's law passed nationwide and appropriately funded that said everyone who works with children should have a common and agreed upon understanding that, one, prevention is possible, two, it's an adult responsibility. And here are some ways where we can minimize opportunities for abuse to occur. And here, if you actually suspect abuse is occurring, it is your responsibility to report it in this way. And finally, if abuse has occurred, how do we support the child and the family in response? And I also want to just have a quick shout out, as we know that different communities are at enhanced risk. As I mentioned, children of active duty military, families and children with disabilities, and then the LGBTQI community as well, because so many children and young people, as they are questioning their own sexuality and coming out, are victimized. And so we actually need, in that Surgeon General's report, to talk about who is at risk, which is, we've talked about every socioeconomic status is at risk, but what are kind of factors that put you at enhanced risk? And so I would love that. And then I'd like to see everyone kind of talking about and committing to prevention.
Because I with the obviously the political climate, at least America is in right now, that's just such a dichotomy. There's two sides. It's us, me versus you. And I just, this is just such a universal issue that I really think that this is one of the few even if you're going to, it's a public health issue, obviously, but people make, everything in, what type of shoes I'm wearing is political today. But
right.
This just seems like could be such a uniting issue to, even if you, like you said, even if you frame it holistically as it affects the family unit, or it's just child abuse and neglect, and you bake in, child sexual abuse into it, it just seems like it could bring everybody together.
Like my husband said when you and I were sitting down and working on that first year budget, Derek, he said, this is the one issue where there really aren't two sides.
Yeah, right.
There are no two sides to this issue. Nobody is for the sexual abuse of children. It's absolutely true, but there just seems to be so much stuff in the way of getting from that realization to figuring out what to do. Your earlier point, Lyndon, about people are afraid of being wrong. I don't think I ever stopped to think about that. I mean, you've got our heads spinning, and you dropped the F-bomb already. So if I do it now too, it's okay. But I mean, yet. This is such a head spinner because it is so obvious, and yet at the same time, it is so impossible. It's I think it's unique. Maybe we need to be working on making it not so unique,
right.
Because when everybody gets that it impacts so many people, everywhere you go. And your point too about it affects everybody, all walks of life, all classes and colors. But there are people who are at increased risk. And it doesn't really have to do with what color you are. It might be because you're confused about your gender, your sexual identity, anything to do with sex, which is the most confusing topic on the face of the earth. Um, you know, you've opened up so many areas of dialogue for us that I kind of don't know which way to go. And now I know what question I want to ask. What would you do if you were us, Lyndon? What would you do if you were us?
Be careful,
If you were three people with a lot of experience from different, approaching this issue over a lot of years in different ways, but we're a small podcast. We are building our structure, and yes, we have heard of the Oak Foundation. We have a very good friend who is working with them. So, if you were us and you didn't have much money, and, you wanted to build listeners, what would you do?
Well, thank you for that question. I also want to say it happens in every religious group. Don't forget religion.
Absolutely.
Because, the Southern Baptist Convention had challenges this summer. We've seen it in Jewish communities, Christian communities, Catholic communities. So don't forget that religion also has struggled with that, and the Boy Scouts at all. So what would I do? The first thing I would do is just what you're doing, is I would keep talking about it, and I would get in people's faces and keep talking about it. But I would really, especially I would kind of map, who is it that you would like to reach? And sometimes, to be honest, as you know, people like to talk about their own work, and they like to talk about themselves, and they like to talk about what is their passion, right? So I would identify key policymakers in Illinois and nationally and get them on your show and just say,
yep.
For example, I would tell you that Rob Portman, a Republican senator from, I think, Ohio, who's retiring, he's not seeking re-election. Go for people who aren't seeking re-election, who can say anything and be damned, right? And just say, do your research. So Rob Portman was really a great bipartisan advocate when they were taking down classified ads where people were advertising sexual services, right? So know what they've done, compliment them on that, and then ask them what else could be done. And ask them for what is your big idea. And I would talk to unusual suspects, right? People who you don't think people know. And I don't know if you saw recently in the New York Times, Jennifer Fox, who made a documentary. I don't know if you've seen Jennifer's movie. It's called The Tale, as in like the story, The Tale. And she tells the story of her own sexual abuse. And she finally, but in the movie, she's a documentary filmmaker. And Laura Linney, I think, plays her, and Common plays her. Right. Fantastic. Right.
Yeah.
And Common, after making that movie, writes in his own work that upon reflection in making that movie, he realizes that he's been sexually abused previously. Right. And so interview Common, get Jennifer Fox on the line, talk to people who have a platform, because the name of the game for small and nimble as you are is amplification. Who can you get that if you've got Common on, you've got Jennifer on, you've got, a senator who you wouldn't think was great on this issue, but is willing to talk about child sex abuse, and who has been a surprising champion. Because to me, whenever I talk to people, I want to surprise people. Like, I love talking about John Cornyn. I have the hugest respect for him because he's taken on a topic that nobody in the Senate wanted to talk about. Now he's talking about it, right? Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, he took on, Safe Sport Act and getting the Olympic kind of athletes protected. So there are people out there who are thinking in big ways, and I would reach out to them, even just for a few minutes, to say, will you talk about what you think is possible? And ask their opinion. Ask them, how do we get there? And find surprising champions. That's my biggest advice. Because in the tobacco control movement, I remember so clearly, I was at a public health conference, Derek, you'll laugh, people are presenting and, it's turgid and difficult and, oh, this works this percent and this works that percent. And the Attorney General of Mississippi, who at the time, his name is Mike Moore, he's in the, he's portrayed in The Insider on the back, and he gets up and he says, just stop. He's like, you're telling me what doesn't work. Let me tell you what does work. What does work is when we build a broad tent. And so Philip Morris and the other tobacco companies have that program that if you go to a bodega or a 7-Eleven, it says, if you weren't born by such and such a date, you can't buy cigarettes, right? Mm-hmm. And that's funded by the tobacco companies. And what public health researchers said was, well, kids go in and they see that and they're like, oh, I'm going to put one over on that clerk. Right. Mm-hmm. And so even though I'm 16, I'm going to be able to buy those cigarettes. And so I'm buying those cigarettes. And so it wasn't really working as a deterrent mm-hmm. for young people to smoke. But what Mike Moore said, and I think of him every day, he said, actually, it works because now as the Attorney General, I have a reason to talk to police officers. I have a reason to talk to bodega owners. I have a reason to talk to vendors, mm-hmm. and I get to tell them that you're part of the solution. So in child sex abuse, we can't just talk to ourselves. We can't just talk to public health professionals. We can't just talk to the fabulous and the good. We have to talk to everyone who has contact with children at every level. Mm. One of the most lovely things that I found from our Texas experience at Darkness Light was after these bus drivers took the Stewards of Children training, they had kind of the head slap moment. They're like, oh, now I know what I'm seeing. When the child who's acting normal and is kind of a well-behaved, fine, and then they start acting out, instead of sending them to the principal's office, what we should be doing is finding someone to talk to them and saying, is there something you need to talk about, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the unexpected champions. So the bus driver, and in some cases, perhaps during the COVID shutdown, maybe it was the delivery guy who's seeing the kid every day, right? So we need to find people you wouldn't expect to be our champions and get them to believe that they are an essential player in the prevention of child sex abuse. Because when everybody believes and we have this broad, unusual set of alliances and a broad tent, that's when we'll see significant, sustained progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
Let's keep going. We got another couple hours, right?
Optimism. It's such a strange concept.
So we're going to be doing this every Wednesday forever until we save the world. All right.
Or until I die.
I love it. Thank you. Because actually, optimism is essential. Because if we don't believe, part of the problem is when you talk to people and you say it happens in every demographic, it's been happening since time immemorial, blah. People go, yeah, but we're never going to fix it. Mm. And you just say, no, that is an abnegation of your responsibility to the future. Your responsibility is to believe that we can change this and then to put some sweat equity into the solution.
Mm.
Absolutely. If I win the lottery tonight or tomorrow and I win $100 billion and I say, gosh, I really liked Lyndon. I'm going to give all $100 billion to Lyndon. How would you use that $100 billion?
Oh, you love that question, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sure. Listen, I know exactly how I'd use it. The first thing I'd do is I would go to the CDC and say, well, I do three things. I go to the CDC and say, enough already. We need national data. Mm-hmm. And the CDC already has this BRFS, which is a behavior risk survey. And it's a national survey of kids of certain ages, right? So I'd say, let's look at the BRFS. And then there's a survey research group out of the University of Chicago. No, at the University of Michigan. It's called NORC.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. I would go to them and I would say, all right, here's the money. Because NORC would do this work, but mm-hmm. first of all, you have to go through human subjects review and you need the money to pay for the research. So I would come up with a research plan that got us that data. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. And then because what happens is you then have to go in and talk with state legislatures about the fact that you're coming in to do this survey. You're going to be talking to kids, how it's not going to hurt them. So I would use the money to get the data. Mm-hmm. The first thing, I would also use the money to have that Surgeon General's report, because again, we need data, we need best practice, a promising practice, and we need a state of what's the state of play. And so that's not that much money. And then I'd use the rest to begin having a national campaign that again breaks it down. Like, what is it you're seeing? What can you do? How can you say it? And then I would fund the services necessary for families across the country to have what they need to have children be safe. I want every child everywhere to be safe where they go to school, where they live, where they play, where they pray. It's as simple as that. We really just need to actually stop talking about the fact. The fact is, if 1 in 3 children is food insecure, don't you think that is a problem? So children need to be our priority. And that means really kind of reinvigorating and reinventing the safety net without shame and without blame, because we're getting nowhere if we don't do that.
Are we at a point where unfortunately we have to say goodbye to Lyndon? I know you allotted us a certain amount of time, Lyndon, and we are so grateful for it. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and my brain and my gut. I'm one of those cynical people who may be abnegating my responsibility to the future. You brought up some things that even after 25 years of working in this field, I honest to God hadn't thought of. So thank you very deeply. I'm sure my friends here want to thank you as well. Anytime you have a spare moment and you want to join us again, the door is not only wide open, it's magnetized. We will pull you in one way or another. Thank you.
What a great conversation, Lyndon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Lyndon, I just want to say thank you so much. And you've been an inspiration for me since I met you. So I just appreciate you staying in touch with me. And I'm going to be just continuing to bug you until, one
until we have that data.
Yeah, right. Until we get the data, till we get $100 billion. So one of us croaks. I don't know, but I'm just going to keep bugging you.
Well, thank you for the conversation. And I want to thank the three of you. Really, the most important thing that each one of us can do. And the other thing I want to say about advocacy is just ask yourself every day, can I do one more thing? Can I have one more conversation? And I think if each one of us committed to having one more conversation, you never know where it's going to land, who's going to disclose, who's going to say, wow, well, actually, I do know the head of the car seat manufacturers, or my buddy is starting this. Every conversation is essential because you don't know where it's going to go. And so having a belief that we're in this together, having a belief that this is possible, and having a commitment to never stopping to talk about it till every child is safe. That's all we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lyndon.
Thank you, and happy to talk with you guys anytime. This has been super fun, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Lyndon. Take care.
Bye.
Another hearty thank you to Lyndon. And I hope all of you enjoyed seeing us today instead of just hearing us. I want to let you know that this isn't going to be the last time we're doing this. There will be visual content, visual versions of each podcast, along with hyperlinks to some of our fascinating visuals and data points that will be available to subscribers. It is coming soon. We do not have all of our digital mechanisms in place yet, but I will be able to tell you more about that when we do this again in May. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.
Like, share, subscribe.